I think the most important thing to remember about philosophy is that none of the great philosophers actually did anything. I mean, you think about the great names in philosophy, Socrates, Immanuel Kant, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, whoever. None of them established any concrete facts that you need to know about in order to understand philosophy. I mean, philosophy is not like chemistry or physics, where facts are built upon other, empirical facts, and you need to know this before you can move on to the next thing. There is no Newton's law in philosophy. There's no Darwinian evolution. Philosophy doesn't advance. The questions of philosophy persist throughout time because they are intrinsic to human nature. What is knowledge? What is right and wrong? What does a good life look like? These are not questions that require some sort of qualification to approach. These are the result of thinking. And these great philosophers that I named, all they had was the same tools you have, which is their own mind and the ability to sit and contemplate an idea. My point is that philosophy is not a discipline. It is your birthright as a human being. It is the result of a mind that is able to think about itself. Anytime you're thinking about thinking, you're analyzing your own thoughts, you are doing philosophy. It's something that you can't even help. That persistent inner dialogue you have, the unwanted ruminations, that basically the thing that keeps you from meditating properly, that is you doing philosophy. Philosophy is the only pursuit in which you can start from zero with no qualifications or tools and immediately be doing the thing, because all the thing requires is your own mind. Being a philosopher, it's not like being a plumber or an electrician where there is, a certification process. I mean, if you want to teach in a college or something, then yeah, you do probably need a degree. But to simply do philosophy, you don't need anything other than your own mind. My big problem with academic philosophy is that it has a way of separating itself from the lived experience of regular people. I mean, in order to formalize and professionalize itself, it has to kind of build this wall of jargon and complex books and, institutional prestige. But the problem is that when you build this wall, what you end up doing is causing regular people to believe in what I think is a very dangerous lie, which is that the truth about human life, about the universe, exists on the other side of that wall. If you're not an academic, then philosophy is something that you can only get peeks of because you don't know the code words. You haven't read the right books. And that is a very dangerous thought because philosophy does not belong to institution. It belongs to consciousness itself. It is what happens when a person thinks about an idea for long enough to wrestle with it and consider it from different angles. It is a thing that is intrinsic to every thinking human being. And what's dangerous about that kind of thinking is that I think it leads people to believe that if they can't express themselves in academic terms, that somehow their thoughts are less valid and less insightful. What you end up doing when you get wrapped up in the world of academia is you confuse the form of an idea with the substance of thought. You think that if you can't articulate your thought, that it's not valid, that it's not insightful, which I think is actually kind of the opposite of the truth, because I think the most profound insights that you can experience as a human being are things that come to you in a way that you can't even put into words in the moment, because you just haven't gotten there yet. But with academia, what ends up happening is people confuse the text for the thought itself. And that is false. That is a trick of school. That is a trick of academics more than it is reality. I think the problem is that when you talk about ancient philosophy like Socrates, the human tendency is to kind of think about Socrates and about ancient Greece as existing in a kind of magical world. You get that like gold filter on the camera, and everything seems like it was more profound and more connected to the universe. But Socrates lived in a time, he experienced reality in the same way you do. He breathed air, and he felt sunlight, and walked on dirt roads, and there were, animals running around. And he was just a person who walked around and thought about things. There was nothing about that he had that you don't have. There was no secret knowledge that he had access to that no one else had. He was just a guy who took the time to think about these things. And I think what ends up really separating people from philosophy as a pursuit is ego, is the feeling that because you're not an academic, that you're not allowed to think about things seriously. What regular people tend to do when they approach a philosophical question is they tend to hedge. They tend to say something like, hey, I'm not a philosopher, but, or, oh, this is going to sound stupid, but I just thought, and then they'll tell you their thought. This sounds harmless, and it sounds like you're being humble. But the problem is there is a cost to this kind of hedging, because internally what you end up doing is you approach the threshold of actual insight, but you cut yourself off because you're afraid to take the next step. The cost of insight is vulnerability, is maybe looking dumb in front of other people. But that's what separates regular people from the supposed great philosophical minds, is the ability to take your own thoughts seriously and to take the next step into the unknown. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't read philosophy. What I'm saying is, if you sit down and you try to read Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reasoning and you find it boring, or if you try to read Nietzsche and you find it grandiose and a bit absurd, just put the book down and walk away. That is okay. That is not some failure of discipline on your part. That's not a lack of seriousness. It just wasn't for you. Maybe someday you'll come back to these books, or maybe you won't. That's also fine. You're not missing that much. What's important is not that you suffer through reading Immanuel Kant. What's important is that you engage with the question of what is thought? What is knowledge? What is right and wrong? Immanuel Kant had a lot to say about these things, but his thoughts are no more valid than yours. Kind of like if you want to write something about love and loss, it would probably be smart to read Shakespeare. But you don't have to. You can just go it alone, and the thing that you find is no less valid because you didn't read the canon. It is interesting and it can be insightful, but it is definitely not necessary. One thought I always have when I'm reading philosophy or even just thinking about things is that all of the great philosophers that I've named, these people are all long dead. And I mean, some of them did, commit suicide, but most of these guys would have loved to have what you have right now, which is the ability to sit and think. I imagine most of these guys would have traded every book, every publication, and all of the prestige they had just for the ability to sit a little bit longer and think a little bit more. And that's something that you do have. And I mean, I get why maybe you don't feel qualified to share your philosophy with other people. That's not even necessary. It's enough to have it in your own head. But I will say, if you do share your philosophy with other people and you get a negative response, that might happen. You got to think about Socrates. Because, I mean, the thing to remember about Socrates as a person was that he was not liked. Socrates was a very annoying person. He walked around in ancient Greece and just bugged the shit out of people, asking them questions they didn't want the answer to. But thousands of years later, we're still talking about Socrates. We're not talking about those other guys. And that's what the world needs more of. The world does not need more agreeable people. And we don't need more grad students either. What the world needs is more people who are willing to ask the question, what are we doing here?